Hi, this is Chuck Braverman, and this is another episode of Westdoc Online. And I just want to remind you first that we're brought to you in part by Real Screen Magazine and Real Screen Summit, which is coming up January 25th to 28th in Austin. It's a great place to meet people who are filmmakers and who are buyers and who are distributors and some attorneys and some music people and some reps and all kinds of people in the nonfiction area. I've been going for 20 years, Real Screen Summit. You go to our website at westdoconline.com and scroll down to the bottom, and there's a Real Screen icon. Click on there. It'll take you right to registration. I've been following the career of our next guest, Robert Weide. I don't know how many years, maybe 15 years, because we seem to cross paths a little bit now and then. I think maybe it was because of the Groucho Marx show that you did that maybe I first talked to Bob, but we're going to get to know all about him. He has a terrific new film about KURT Vonnegut, a biography, and we're going to find out where it's playing, and you're going to learn a lot about Vonnegut if you didn't know, and you'll see another one of my connections to Vonnegut, which is pretty weird. But before we do, let's watch the trailer so you get an idea of where we're going, and we'll come right back and meet the filmmaker.
Hi, this is Vonnegut.
The preeminent novelist of our time, KURT Vonnegut. Do you really know the answers to everything?
What would you like to know?
Well,
He's been the most profound influence in my life.
I think he's the funniest person alive.
I was 23 when I first approached him about making this film. I became obsessed.
What high school kid isn't going to gobble this up?
He thinks what I think about the world. Then there was a letter.
Dear Robert Weide.
Holy crap, it's him. I was always filming on and off with him over the years, just thinking, I'll figure this out later.
Are we going?
Yeah. We would talk about almost anything.
Now, what are my books about?
He was opening up about his childhood.
10 years old. I pointed up and said, there is Tralfamador.
His experience in Dresden.
We all came out, and the city was gone.
We become friends.
If you find your life tangled up with somebody else's, that person may be a member of your karass.
But no matter how much time I put in, I never finished the film.
Hi, Bob. I look forward to seeing you on Thursday.
The author, KURT Vonnegut, has died.
So it goes.
Kurt told me once, we don't understand the first thing about time. This is how he experienced life.
When you take almost 40 years to make a film, you owe some kind of an explanation.
Billy Pilgrim has come unstuck in time.
What happens when a writer stops writing?
Sadness is an interesting emotion.
I prefer laughter to crying.
Vonnegut shows that it's not the end, it's the journey.
That's the impermanence of life. This day is as real as any day we're going to live.
When things are going sweetly, please pause and say, if this isn't nice, what is?
Hi, Bob. This is Kurt. I want to thank you for your friendship. Love you.
Can you just do that line one more time?
Up your ass. What do you want?
What a great trailer. And if that doesn't make you want to see a film about one of the greatest authors of all time, maybe meeting the filmmaker will. Let's say hello to Robert Weide. Hey, Bob.
Good afternoon, Chuck.
How are you doing?
Good. How are you today?
Good.
Good.
I always ask the people on my show, where are they? Because we're obviously on our computers and webcams. I think I know where you are, but you're in the Los Angeles area also?
Yeah, I'm in LA, and I'm in my home, and behind me is a tribute to analog. For the youngsters out there, those are videotapes. Those are mainly 3/4 inch, some beta SPs in there. But at least I shelved all the 16 millimeters, so I don't want to go back that far in time.
Yeah, so you beat me to the punch of asking, the silly question of what are those black boxes with those white labels behind you, of which
Yeah,
our lives used to depend upon those all the time, right? I mean, everything was on
yeah,
videotape, and now it's
I'll
on
say.
little cards or on SSDs or something like that.
I know.
Uh,
Yeah,
you know,
well, what's interesting is my first few films, for several films, were actually cut on videotape on an old. I entered just as things were moving from film to, post production, from film to offline and online videotape editing. So I had one of the early, offline convergent systems, and we would cut tape to tape. And every time, if you had a cut of your film, every time you wanted to change one little thing or just lose a few frames, you had to lay it all down in real time, and you would lose a generation in the quality. And it seemed like it was just fine back then, but of course you look at it now and it seems so antiquated and such a horrible way to work.
how did we
But
ever how did we ever do it? I mean, my first television show that I directed and had to cut, I was given reel tapes with burnt-in time code,
Right.
and I cut it on paper. In other words,
Yeah.
I made notes, and it was for TV. It was called David Hartman, Birth and Babies, and it had to be, to the frame by the end. And so think about that. Have a 90-minute show, and the way I put it together was with an EDL, an edit decision list at CFI. Do you remember CFI?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, CFI, which was like probably the biggest independent lab, and they had all the big 2-inch machines that would assemble
Right.
my paper cut.
Oh, we're boring people right up front at the beginning of this
Of
interview.
course.
You'll go back and cut all of this out, I hope. But yeah, one last thing is that when you're talking about 16 millimeter and you had, your Moviola or your Steenbeck, and if you had something and you wanted to lose 2 frames, you physically cut those frames out of the film. You hung it on a little hook, on a sprocket, and then you taped it up, and then you watched it. And then if you said, I need one of those frames back, you had to take it off, trim 1 frame off the tube, put 1 frame back on the hook, cut it open and put in the frame and tape it. It's insane. And yet at every step of the way, we always thought, yeah, this is fine. We don't realize until later what a chore it was. Anyway, we really should move on because this is a horrible way to start the interview.
No, it really isn't. I think anybody is watching a website about documentary filmmaking, they should appreciate this. I mean,
That's true. I will agree. The four people watching this could be interested in this conversation. That's very true.
it's funny.
That's a reflection of me, not you.
I hope so. As I was watching, and I realized, I knew, of course, that this film you've been working on for 40 years, you were kind of like the worst person in the world to be hired by one of the news organizations to do an instant documentary that has to be on tomorrow night at 9. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's so funny you would say that when I was finishing my Lenny Bruce film, which only took 13 years. My joke at the time was that I didn't know whether to have the film released or bar mitzvahed. But at the very end, I had a co-editor. Ultimately, it was done for HBO, and he and I were joking, because I just take so long with some of these films. We were joking that if I were in charge, this was like in 1998, that if I were in charge of the evening news, I'd just be now getting around to Pearl Harbor. I'd be a little bit behind the times, but so it goes, as Kurt would say.
Should I tell you my connection to Lenny Bruce? I don't want to make
Off
it
camera.
about me. Oh, you don't want to know?
Sure, tell me. No, go ahead.
I was a stringer cameraman We can cut this out. I was a stringer cameraman for years. The guy with the police and fire radio in my car, and I got a tip one night.
Were you sent to his house in '66 when he died?
Yes, I was there. I got the footage inside, and that ended
No
up.
kid, you shot. I was wondering who the ghouls were who went inside and shot that footage.
Yeah, and there
So
were
you
very few ghouls were there that night.
Wow.
And standing next to me, outside,
Phil Spector.
Yes. And I only knew who he was because he went to the same high school as I did, although he was several years older than me. But when I was in junior high school, they came to John Burroughs Junior High and sang "To Know Him Is to Love Him." And I knew what he looked like,
Wow.
Anyway, they wouldn't let him
that's
in
crazy.
the house, but they let me in the house because I had a fake clip-on tie and a camera.
Oh, that footage is so disconcerting. Anyway,
you tell the story within the documentary about your sort of awakening in high school and the teacher that turned you on to Vonnegut and his writing, and you wrote him a book. So
wrote him a letter, you mean?
I mean, wrote him a letter. At what point did you think, actually, I'm going to make a documentary? And did it ever occur to you, that it was going to take this long, or that it would be this involved? Or, I mean, what was the process that, and also within the doc, you talk about being interviewed 4 or 5 times in different shirts and different wardrobe. So why were there so many false starts? Although this happens in the doc world, but why did it happen in this show?
Sure. All right, I'll try to answer all of that in a stream of consciousness. Yes, it was a high school teacher who first put a Vonnegut book in my hand, Valerie Stevenson, and the book was Breakfast of Champions, which she says now sort of horrifies her as she thinks about the content of that book, that she would have a high school class read it. She didn't just give it to me; it was actually assigned reading in this class. I guess this must have been American literature or something. And I just read it and I said, I found my author. This is my guy. And I hold Vonnegut responsible for me not being a more well-read person, because once I discovered his books, I really didn't care about any other authors. And when I was a kid, I mean, I read Dickens and I read, all kinds of high-end stuff. But when I got to Vonnegut, I said, okay, that's it. This is the only guy I need to know about. But I will say this about Valerie Stevenson all these years later, because I graduated high school in '77, so it would have been maybe '76 that she gave me that book. I did not have to search for her. She and I have remained in touch all this time. I have a couple of high school teachers that I remain in touch with who were very important people in my life. And so I asked her if she wanted to be in the documentary, and she said yes. Now, and I like the idea, I like being able to pay tribute to her and to teachers in general, because they're really a valuable commodity in this society, certainly in a democracy, and we undervalue them. But in any event, the next part of your question, I got an early start on my career. My Marx Brothers documentary I made in 1982 when I was 22. I got the idea to make it when I was 18, and it took 4 years, which now seems to me a relatively short amount of time to make a film, considering this one took almost 40 years. But I made my Marx Brothers documentary. I remained a huge fan of KURT's. Now, again, Breakfast of Champions, that would have been 76. Now we're talking 1982. So what is that, 6 years later? Yeah. I was absent from school the day we learned math, so that's not my forte. But in any event, I made the Marx Brothers film, and then afterwards said, well, that was fun. It actually wasn't, but in hindsight, it seemed fun. But I said, what's next? Well, how about a documentary on Vonnegut? Now, all of my documentaries to this day have been on subjects that have been of huge personal value and interest to me. I basically covered all of my adolescent obsessions. I mean, my big my Mount Rushmore in high school during my formative years were the Marx Brothers, Lenny Bruce, Woody Allen, and Kurt Vonnegut, and they've all been subjects of my film. So I got this idea to just write Kurt a letter in 82, and I said, you don't know me, but I'm a big fan of yours, and I did this film on the Marx Brothers because I'm a big fan of theirs, and I'd like to make a film about you. And he wrote back and he said, sure. In fact, we see this letter in the documentary because there is this meta element within the film about the making of the documentary and the evolution of my friendship with him. And he said, my work is on the page, it's not on film, so I don't know how you make a film about me, but presumably you'll have some idea about that. And here's my phone number, give me a call. And when you're next in New York, we'll get together, which was a wild thing to read. I mean, imagine being like a Kerouac fan or a Salinger fan and getting a letter from them saying, here's my phone number, call me and we'll get together. So that was pretty intimidating. But then 82, and at the time, I went to New York and we hung out a bit. And at the time, my thinking about the film was that it would be a very conventional sort of PBS American Masters authored documentary. In fact, at the time, well, actually American Masters wasn't up and running yet, but they came on the air, I think, in 86, and I thought, well, this is an ideal home for this. So I thought it would be that kind of film. Now, he said yes in 82. We started to hang out and get to know each other a little bit. I didn't start filming until 88, only because that's when I was first able to get my hands on some money to do some filming. So I started to film him in 88, but the film, didn't have a home. So it was just self-financed for years. So in any event, years went by and years turned into decades. And over that time, he and I became very close. We became very intimate friends. And my concern early on was, how is this going to affect the film? Because to the extent that a film like this, biography, necessitates some level of journalistic integrity, he's a friend of mine now. How do I navigate that? And then I thought, well, to hell with it. I don't care. I'm just going to keep filming him and I'll figure this out later. And so, decades were rolling by, and then he died in 2007. I thought, well, I won't be doing any more filming with him. I've really got to wrap this thing up. So this is already 14, 15 years ago. And, but I couldn't quite figure out what the film was now, because my own involvement in his life had skewed things so. And a few people, some of them mutual friends of Vonnegut and myself, and in one case, Jerry Klinkowitz, who was not only a friend of Vonnegut's and mine at this point, but a Vonnegut scholar, sort of the leading Vonnegut scholar in the country, or the world, I might say, said, well, you've got to tell that story. The story of meeting this literary hero of yours, becoming a friend of his, the evolution of that friendship, how it affected the film, and the struggle to make the film over all these years should be tucked into the biography. That should be folded into the documentary, which I really resisted for a long time because I really didn't have any interest in being in the film. Some people pull that off, Michael Moore, obviously, and Morgan Spurlock, and any number of filmmakers can, put themselves in a film, and it's fine, but I didn't want to do that. And then reluctantly, I started to put my toe in the water by doing a little voiceover and then a little bit of filming. And then what I had was sort of neither fish nor fowl. And then people were looking at that and said, no, you've got to commit to this device, to this strategy. And so we did some more filming with me. And now this is a very long answer, but I'm covering 5 questions at once. Once the decision was made, once I finally said, okay, I'll try this kind of meta element, including this meta element, I thought, I don't want to be responsible for that part of the film. I don't want to be filming myself or interviewing myself. It's awkward, it's self-aggrandizing. I'll bring in another filmmaker to basically cover that part of the film about me and the making of the film while I continue to focus on Vonnegut and his biography. So I brought in Don Argett, a filmmaker who I met in Kiev, Ukraine, of all places. We were both out there for a film festival in, I don't know, like 13 or so. They were showing a film of mine and a film of his with his wife. And we got along. And sometime after that, I said to him, hey, are you a Vonnegut fan? I called him up. He said, oh, yeah, he's probably my favorite author. I said, well, let me propose this to you. And I told him this plan that he would come in and sort of make this film within a film about me and the making of the film, my friendship with Kurt, and then I could focus on the biography. So that's basically what we did. So Don came in at that point, and what we created was a hybrid between our respective strengths, mine in these kind of biographical profiles of artists, and his, background, which is more in verite documentary filmmaking. And we sort of combined the two. So the end result is first and foremost a documentary about Kurt Vonnegut, but secondarily a documentary about me trying to make the film and my friendship with Vonnegut, which was, had a major impact on my life. It still does all these years after he's gone. He's still a big part of my life. So I think that should answer all of your questions so far.
Well, you not only did it answer, you anticipated a couple of questions of mine, which you've already done. I could just sit back and, you could,
I'll just do these
because I was going to ask about
monologues.
how did you bring Don Argott in? Well, obviously you just told us, and normally I would completely agree with you. I'm not a huge fan of people that insert themselves in biographies of other people, but I think in this case, it worked really well. You are part of the story. You knew him for so many years, and you humanized him in a way that Ken Burns couldn't have done with letters from his second cousin or somebody like that. And I loved all the interviews with his children.
Well, people who looked at the film when I was still sort of on the fence about this said, no, you've earned this, because it's not like, you get a lot of those sort of biographies and things where people overplay their role in the life of their subject, and and I didn't want this to be, Kurt and I were such good friends. I didn't want it to smack of that kind of ego. But friends said, no, you earned this, because you'll see in the film, we were very close friends. I mean, we were very much a part of each other's lives, and so it wasn't just kind of a passing acquaintance or I got to be friendly with my subject. We logged a lot of FaceTime together, and he would invite me out to his country place in Sagaponack, New York on Long Island, and I'd spend a week with him, just the two of us hanging out. And anytime he was out here, we would get together, and any trip to New York, of course, included some, usually multiple visits with him and meals and walking around the city. And, I talk about this in the film. When we met, I was single. I was single for any number of years. I didn't get married until I was almost 40. So he was very interested in my dating life and always asking me about women I was going out with. And in some cases, he'd come out to LA and I'd bring whoever was my current girlfriend to meet him, which was, usually pretty impressive stuff. But, and then I met Linda I met Linda 27 years ago today. Today is the anniversary of our meeting, 27 years ago. So he met Linda and he adored her. And if you knew Linda, if you know her, she's pretty adorable. So he just told me, you've got to marry this woman. There's a letter in the film that he sent me, I think after he met her the first time. And I memorized the opening. It says, Dear Romeo, he calls me. He says, and believe me, that is some Juliet. Go for it. That redhead is a keeper. And I kept her. He encouraged me. I talked to him about marriage, and he said, no, you've got to do it. You've got to marry this girl. So that's the level of impact he had on my life.
Getting back to the film, the specifics, technical stuff, which I like to get into a little bit. 40 years ago, anything that you would have shot on any media is going to fade. And I noticed, because I could see the pictures, of the Aton on the cameraman's shoulder that you were shooting with. Did you have, problems with color fading, which it looked incredibly good considering how old it was. Was that a color? Was that the colorist at Photochem that was helping you out there? Or
Sure. Although we really, a little bit of grading when we were doing the high def transfers off of the negative, by the way, not the film. And then, of course, the final color grading and post when the film was finished. But no, this film has gone through every medium because it started in 16 millimeter, did some shooting with, Betacam. There's probably some high 8 in there. Then after Kurt died, there were more interviews that I filmed with other people, which was all, high def and, 1080. And even a few shots shot with my either like a consumer level, camcorder, or palm recorder, a Canon that I still have, and some stuff shot on my iPhone. So it really covers the whole gamut. But as far as the film, the stuff that I shot in 88 and 94, I'm only going into this because presumably these are documentary filmmakers watching this because, again, no one else cares about this stuff. It's a little inside baseball. But the film that I shot in 88 and 94 was initially transferred to 1-inch video. That's what I was going to post on, was 1-inch video, which was the standard at the time. And then more years went by and I said, oh, no one's using 1-inch anymore. So like an idiot, I retransferred the stuff, some of it to Digibeta, some of it to just like Beta SP, which is not quite as good as Digibeta, but the tapes were cheaper. That's why I was saving money, because the Digibeta tapes were more expensive. And then more years went by, and then, nobody was using tape anymore. So I transferred it one last time. And fortunately, the entire time, the negative was in storage, not in a place where there was it was temperature controlled or anything, but just a regular, storage place with boxes. So I pulled all the boxes out of storage and went over to Photochem here in Burbank. These are boxes of original negative, and just transferred everything again digitally, and stuff looked great, because the negative had been sitting untouched.
Were you paying for this, supporting yourself by your day job, which I want to talk about in a second, on your own, or did you have some benefit?
No,
yeah. How did you pay for everything? Because everything you talked about is very expensive.
Yeah, it was all on my own, and that's one of the reasons why the damn film took almost 40 years. Is I either would have the time but no money, or I'd have the money but no time. Because if I had the money, that implied I was working. So if I was working, I really didn't have time for my little hobby film. If I wasn't working, I didn't have money to put into my hobby film. So there was really no period where I had the time and the money to work on it. So yes, it was all out of my own pocket. I will say the first shoot in 1988, I did get some R&D money from American Masters, from Susan Lacey at the time, who wanted the film, and it never worked out as an American Masters piece because, well, that's boring. But so the first little piece of money was from American Masters. Then it was all out of my. That's all the stuff that was shot in Buffalo, New York, that you see in the film. Then it was out of my own pocket for years. It was just this hobby project that I put some time into now and again when I had a little time or a little money. And that was it until Don Argett came on in 2014. We launched a Kickstarter campaign. Now the Kickstarter campaign was very successful and raised a nice chunk of dough for us. Not enough to finish it, but enough to at least arrive to a cut that I could then take around and try to sell. Little did I know that the film wouldn't be finished until 7.5 years after the Kickstarter campaign, which was in February of 2015, I guess. And, those people thought they'd help finance a film that they'd get to see in a year. And they've been very patient for the most part. I've gotten a couple of angry emails, but for the most part, people have been very patient. They've been waiting for this. So the Kickstarter money helped. And then finally, I was able to make the film, and then started to take it around, actually, initially via the trailer that you showed. And IFC Films, God bless them, they saw that trailer and they said, we want to see the film.
Well,
And
that's
they
what I'm
saw
going
the
to ask.
film.
So
They
is
said,
this
"Yeah,
going to
we want this."
be released theatrically at first?
Theatrically, yeah. November 19th. And the week before, November 11th, which coincidentally happens to be Kurt's 99th birthday, it will have a premiere at Doc NYC in New York. But then, yes, theatrically, November 19th via IFC Films. And I believe the VOD release, it'll either be right on the heels of the theatrical or day and date. So it might be available VOD on November 19th, and then eventually winds up on Hulu. That's through an output deal with IFC Films. So anyway.
Oh, that's great. I was going to ask you where it was going to end. But so here's a question I've been thinking about. We haven't mentioned yet. You have another career. I mean, what's so great about, documentary filmmakers is that most filmmakers and most people, if you're a shoemaker and you make shoes, you might not be able to make boots, and if you're a documentary filmmaker, you probably can't do scripted stuff or comedy, but you've directed 28 episodes of Curb Your Enthusiasm.
29, which will air next month.
29 episodes.
Well,
with
I don't
Larry
know when you're
David.
showing this, but
How did that?
Yeah.
What was that evolution like? I mean, now it seems like a natural, but I remember when the pilot. Did you do the pilot too for the show?
Yeah, we didn't think of it as a pilot at the time because we didn't know there'd be a series. It was just a one-off hour, and then HBO said, "How would you guys like to do a series based on this?"
But so, like, what I'm trying to get at is the producing or directing Larry David, and in a show which is, and you should correct me if I'm wrong, but my having not worked on that show, it is sort of outlined in their ideas, but it's improvised, maybe scripted a little bit. But tell us about the process of that, and how does that relate to being a documentary filmmaker, if at all?
Well, there is a connection because now Larry and I met in 82 or 83, soon after my Marx Brothers film, and around the time I was writing KURT VONNEGUT, because I had another life. I was working development for Rollins and Joffe, which was a production and management company, who did Woody Allen's films and managed, Robin Williams and Dick Cavett and Robert Klein and Martin Short and a whole roster of top-end comedy talent. But I was their development guy, and Larry David wrote a script that wound up on my desk, which I loved, and we never made it over there, but Larry and I became friends that way. So we remained in touch, and then this was long before he did Seinfeld. Larry at the time was this unemployed, unappreciated comic genius, perhaps, who couldn't make a buck. He was planning on being homeless someday. But in any event, so then he went off and did Seinfeld, this little show Seinfeld, and we remained in touch. And then after Seinfeld, he did his movie, which did no business. And then he wrote a script, which I read, because he would send me scripts to get my input on it. And around this time, he had this idea to do an HBO special that he wanted shot like a documentary. And the idea was that it would not be scripted. There would be an outline. We'd work off an outline. But the dialogue would be mainly improvised. It would be shot handheld, and it would be presented as a documentary. It'd be sort of a faux documentary, the kind of thing that, Chris Guest does, perhaps. And so we thought, well, Bob does real documentaries, and we share a similar sense of humor, and we get along well. I should ask Bob to do it, and he can make it look like a real documentary. So in that regard, there was a direct connection to my documentary background. So, he had no concerns about, well, can he direct actors and can he get performances? What's to that? So, we did it, and it was very off the cuff. And I remember the production schedule for the original special, which was an hour, was months and months because it was very loosey-goosey. We'd shoot for a few days and then, take off a couple of weeks and come back and shoot again and then take time off. So, we did it, and it was really under the radar. I don't know that anybody watched the original special. We did it for very little money. And then, as I say, HBO approached Larry and said, how would you guys like to do a series based on this? And I remember I was in Hot Springs, Arkansas. They have a documentary film festival out there, and I was there with my Lenny Bruce film, which at the time was brand new. It was my latest film. And Larry called me up and he said, hey, HBO wants to know if we want to do a series. What do you think? And I said, oh, well, how many episodes do they want? Because, I was never a fan of working that hard. And he was very tuned into what I was getting at. And he said, well, they're asking for 13, but I think I can talk them down to 10. So, oh, well, that sounds easy to do 10 episodes.
This is
the only executive producer.
Right.
Yeah, who tries to talk down the order. Because, who wants to go all year with this? So we did 10. And again, the first season, we were sort of a critics' darling right up front. The critics were very nice to us. I don't think we got much in the way of ratings. And then we did a second season. And I think before the second season, HBO repeated the first season and sort of primed the pump. And I think that brought more people in. And then the fan base just kept growing and growing until it became still not a big ratings show. We never did Sopranos numbers or probably even Sex and the City numbers, but none of us cared. To this day, I'd never heard a rating on Curb. We never called to find out. We didn't care. But it just became this kind of cult favorite. And now I was the executive producer of the show for any number of years. And then after season 5, I left my full-time duties on the show to do other things because it was like, okay, this is fun, but enough is enough. And now I just go back and I direct one episode a season. Out of 10 episodes, I used to direct 5 or 6. Now I just come back and do my one. So my one will be on, I think, November 21st is the 5th episode of the new season.
So, like, as you reminded me, I used to have offices at Lantana, and Larry's office was right down the hall, and I would see him all the time. Mm-hmm. But I think when they started shooting, and they would do a lot of shooting at Lantana, this is an office complex in Santa Monica, they had a really small crew, just a few people. And every season it seemed to get bigger, and then there were 40-foot trucks and trailers and catering and everything like a real movie.
Yeah, we really shot it like a documentary. In fact, that special, if you came upon us at a location shooting the special, you would have seen me, whoever's Larry and whoever's on camera. You would have seen a camera operator with a digibeta camera, our line producer who had a cheap little, palm recorder as a second camera in case we needed it. You'd see a guy, sound mixer and a guy with a boom, and that was probably it. I mean, we were that streamlined, really shooting it like a documentary. And then, once we started to do the series, more people, and it grew and grew. And then you've got Teamsters and trucks and all kinds of equipment and all that. And now if we go into a neighborhood, it's like a complete invasion. And in fact, I sat out season 7 because I was in England directing a movie, which is one of the reasons why I left the show, was to do that. And so I did season 5 full-time. Season 6, I think I did one episode, skipped season 7, came back for season 8. And I just couldn't believe how much equipment, how many people and how many trucks there were. It had just grown like mad during my hiatus from the show. And it's a very different show now. I think the heart of it is still the same, but the look and feel of the show is quite different, but it's no longer my baby. It's someone else's now.
Our paths really have crisscrossed over back and forth. It's funny because you mentioned Seinfeld. I think I was the first person to actually put him on national television. I don't know if you knew that.
Oh, was it like a young comedian special or something?
I did a series for Showtime called The Big Laugh Off. And I would go around the country and find unknown young comics like Eddie Murphy and Jerry Seinfeld and George Wallace and, 100 others. And Jerry was one of my favorites. And he actually, came out to LA and said, well, what do I do? literally. And I said, well, you should get a date at the Comedy Store, the Improv. Let me know when, and I'll have my agent come to see your show, and maybe something will happen. And that's great. I'll do that. And next week he had a gig at the Comedy Store, or whatever. And my agent at the time was Marty Klein, who was the president of APA.
Marty, you bet.
And he brought with him Steve Martin, who at the time was touring the country in this huge, he was the biggest comic in the world at the time. And they saw Jerry and they liked him and they signed him. And Jerry was ecstatic. And I said, don't get excited. You're just signed by an agent now. It doesn't really mean anything. You're going to go out on, a lot of interviews, and you're going to get rejected and rejected and rejected. So this is great. This is good news, but just to be cool about it. He said, I'm so excited. Thank you. And he went out on his first interview, and I don't know, his first audition, and he got a job on a sitcom where he played a minor character for a season. I can't remember the name of the show. And then, of course,
was it Benson or something like that?
No.
Anyway. Yeah, whatever happened to him?
Yeah, I don't know. So if somebody's sort of like tuning into this and is young and doesn't really know who KURT Vonnegut was, what would you say to them about why he's an important writer? How would you give them a sentence or two on Vonnegut?
I can talk about what appeals to me, or what appealed to me, is that he deals with big questions about what's the point of the universe and everything that we experience. And he deals with social issues, political issues to some degree, issues that are still very valid about the environment and relationships and all that. But he takes these serious issues and filters it through this great, he's from Indianapolis, of course, this great kind of Midwestern sensibility and this just great sense of humor. I mean, I think Vonnegut was really a great comedian, or certainly a great humorist above all else. So the people I was attracted to, if you think about it, not the Marx Brothers so much, who were just funny. They didn't have to be anything more than funny. But Lenny Bruce did the same thing. Took on these social issues, relationship issues, and made it, very, very funny. Woody Allen, to a certain degree, has done that. And Vonnegut does it. So it's sort of that cliche about you're laughing 1 minute and crying the next. And I find that to be literally true with his work. If I read one of his books, I can be laughing hysterically and then tearing up at something so profound. So that's what I like about him, is that, and it's not just me. It's amazing how his career just goes on and on. I mean, his books are still continually in print. I mean, every book in his canon, from Player Piano, which I think was 52, to his last book, A Man Without a Country, 2005, and some posthumous releases of short stories and things, all remain in print and all still sell well all over the world. So he does plug into some kind of, I hate using words like zeitgeist, but he's totally on top of it, and very prescient, and saying things in the 50s and 60s that have literally come true and are still very valid. So he's of his time, but he's timeless. But very entertaining. He's a very entertaining read. For people who talk about, younger people may not know who he is, there are a lot of younger people whose, noses are always in their phones and don't think to pick up a book because somehow they're intimidated, or, I don't know, reading is a bother. His books are just so damn entertaining. There's nothing, first of all, they're short for the most part. The chapters are short. The language that he uses is simple. There's nothing intimidating about his books. Pick up a copy of Breakfast of Champions at a library or bookstore and just flip through it, and you look at how the text is laid out and the illustrations, and it's kind of like the fun of reading a graphic novel. I mean, it goes down that easily. But he's just such a unique storyteller. It's funny because he and I became very good friends, as we've discussed, and our relationship was always kept very light. A lot of bad jokes, a lot of laughing. We laughed a lot. And we both had this appreciation of old comedians. He loved the Marx Brothers, W.C. Fields, which was the subject of another film of mine. Laurel and Hardy, certainly he was crazy about. And so we spent a lot of time just laughing. And again, really bad jokes. Like one of his favorite, the stupider the joke, the better for him. Like one joke he liked was, why is cream so much more expensive than milk? And the answer is because it's hard to get the cows to squat over those little bottles. Now, that makes no sense to younger people who don't remember cream coming in little bottles. And his other joke, which is even worse, was, I'll do the lead it and you say, I give up, and then I'll give the answer. What's the white stuff in bird poop?
I give up.
Well, that's bird poop too. He thought that was hysterical. So that was like his level of joke telling when we got together. And sometimes, you drink a little bit and, this stuff can be very funny. I mean, it actually strikes me as pretty funny.
That's a prerequisite for that second joke, I think, would be like...
Yeah, definitely.
But there's a big contradiction.
I'll finish this point. I know it's dragging on, but I'll wrap it up. Is, once I got to know him on that level and we were just friends hanging out and having a laugh, I'd go back and read his books. And some of them are so profound and so heavy and so insightful that I think, how can my friend making the poop jokes have written this? It was hard to consolidate the guy that I got to know with the profoundness of his work, which was what introduced me to him and got me interested in him. But he had both sides. He could be just extremely thoughtful and brilliant and insightful and profound and be a guy making just dumb jokes.
Well, thank you, Robert Weide, for a terrific conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I look forward to everybody seeing this film.
I have to ask you, do you still have your company, Tralfamadore Productions?
Of course I do.
Well, that's our other connection.
It's Tralfamadore Corporation, and everything goes. As a matter of fact, if you look at you go to the bottom of Westdoc Online, these shows are copyrighted Tralfamadore Corp.
There you go. See, because we were friends. I liked you before I knew that, and then when I saw that, I said, okay, we can cement this thing now because this is more than coincidence. Anyway, thanks, Chuck. It was a pleasure. I appreciate it.